Hello, welcome to the launch of the brand new book, Gravity, A Missing Link in Child Development by Oleg Yefimov, Victoria Yefimova, and Melody de Jager. I'm Mariette Snyman, a journalist from South Africa, and it's my pleasure to introduce you to the three authors. First, Dr. Oleg Yefimov, neurologist from the Prognosis Clinic in St. Petersburg, Russia, where they work with 120 doctors. Hello, Oleg.
Hello. Hello.
Then Victoria Yefimova, speech therapist from the Prognosis Clinic in St. Petersburg, Russia. Hello, Victoria.
Hello. Nice to meet you.
And Dr. Melody de Jager, developmental specialist from the Mind Moves Institute in Johannesburg, South Africa. Hi, Melody.
Hello, Mariette.
Now, could each of you please tell us a little about your work with children?
Я основал клинику в 1988 году, то есть 31,5 год назад. И клиника неврологическая. Она самая большая в России и, наверное, в Европе. Нет такой большой клиники и представительной, специализирующейся именно на детской неврологии. Сейчас основные наши дети, которых мы лечим, это дети с аутизмом, дети с задержкой развития речи, не говорящие дети, и дети, школьники, которые не могут учиться в школе хорошо, хотя они здоровы, и у них нет проблем других, там и умственной отсталости нет, и слух хороший, зрение хорошее, но они не могут учиться. Вот сейчас мы открываем 7-ю клинику у нас для маленьких детей. Будут дети, малютки, совсем маленькие дети, и это будет 7-я клиника. Мы находимся в центре Санкт-Петербурга, очень удобно. Приезжают из Европы очень много детей, из Москвы, из других регионов, из Азии.
Excellent. And then you, Victoria?
My experience with children is 30 years, and I started to work as a speech therapist in a kindergarten for children with speech delay. And I worked as a speech therapist all these years. And the last 10 years, I work with my husband in Prognosis Clinic.
Thank you. And Melody?
I'm a nursery school teacher by profession. And so I've worked with children for 38 years. And why I became a nursery school teacher was because somehow I heard when I was a child that if you really want to influence the development of a child, due to the sensitivity, plasticity of the brain, the best time is before the age of 6. So I became a nursery school teacher. And since then, I've been working with children on different levels, with babies to prevent challenges later on, and then with older children who are experiencing similar problems to what Oleg and Victoria has mentioned. ADHD, dyslexia, everything, not everything, the typical symptoms that we often see in a report that says a child has this problem, that problem, or the next one. So I've been working with that I have been working with children then for 38 years and are delighted to have found amazing people on the other side of the globe.
Yes, and it's so unusual for people from Russia and someone from South Africa to co-author a book. So how did this come about?
Can I explain? It was Oleg who found Melody. And actually at first it was not Melody, but article written by Melody about vestibular system. I need to say that vestibular system, it is a point of our great interest now. And Alec asked me, who is this wonderful person who can explain very difficult things using simple words? And we decided to write mail to Melody and invite her to Russia to make seminar for educational specialists. And Melody was very brave, and she says, yes, I'd like to come. And when we met Melody in St. Petersburg, we immediately understand that Melody is our person. And very quick, we decided to make book together. But it was only our dream. Yes, Melody?
Absolutely, Victoria. It was a dream because how would we do that being from different continents? How would we do that not speaking the same language? So it was a dream, but no longer.
Yes, and the specific challenges. I mean, there's a language challenge, there's a cultural challenge, but I can see you like each other very much, which helps a lot. So can you tell us a bit about the challenges?
Мелоди очень замечательный ученый. Я очень много литературу контролирую, американскую, европейскую. И Мелоди нам самый приятный, самый интересный ученый, с которым мы можем общаться. И поэтому у нас трудностей практически не было. Трудности, потому что мы очень хорошо друг друга понимали, потому что мы говорим об одних вещах очень хорошо. Мы много ездили в Соединенные Штаты, United States, значит, мы ездили в Европу с Викторией, много встречались с другими учеными, но лучше Мелоди мы никого не встретили. Это наш замечательный друг.
Oleg, you're very kind. Marit, if I may say, I think Victoria and Oleg, what happened right from the start is we didn't focus on the difficulties or the challenges to do something. We shared an incredible passion for children and for taking away or removing any kind of barrier to a quality life for the child and for the family. So it's the child, but it's also the family. So we had that in common. Our way of approaching that was vastly different. But we had so much in common that really mattered, that everything else became just a mosquito flying around. If you want to understand the vestibular system, you actually just have to watch the interaction between Alec, Victoria, and myself. Because Victoria is the vestibular system. She keeps on directing information between Alec, which I call the brain, and myself, which I call the earth and gravity. So without Victoria in the middle, Oleg and I have no way of understanding each other.
It's a good idea.
В нашей клинике мы создали диагностическая вестибулярная клиника по изучению gravity, да? Самая современная аппаратура, которой нет, нигде больше нет. Есть только в Росмари Райн в Соединенных Штатах, во Франции Сильвет Венервотчер, и больше нигде нет такой клиники, как у нас, с таким количеством аппаратуры, самой современной, с диагностической. Поэтому мы, конечно, самую такую хорошую научную информацию получаем о нашей аппаратуре. И огромное количество детей, по-моему, сейчас больше 20 тысяч детей прошли через нашу клинику вестибулярную.
Yes, I would hope that when this book is read worldwide, that situation will change.
We hope.
Hope,
yes.
In South Africa, there are universities that are starting to investigate the working of the vestibular system and do some diagnostics around that. But I think what is amazing was the way that the prognosis clinic, the way they approach the vestibular system and the extent of the assessment using top equipment in the world, the way they assess the vestibular system and the way that we I mean from myself as from the Mind Moves Institute in South Africa, the way we assess in South Africa, where we use no equipment. I'm not saying all of South Africa, I'm saying at the Mind Moves Institute, we don't use any equipment. We use very basic physical tests because there's so much difficulty to get all people in South Africa to equipment and to good service. We've developed a different way of assessing that is, it uses your body. You just assess from that side. So from our, which Oleg sometimes called African magic, but when we join African magic with Russian science, it is actually what brings something unique to the world, I believe, which works similar to the principles of biomimicry. So we look in South Africa at the Institute, we look at the body and at nature to guide us, where our colleagues in Russia has used the most amazing equipment. And what was phenomenal to discover when we spent time together, and we haven't spent a lot of time together, but when we've spent time together to realize, but we find similar things, even though our assessment methods are vastly, vastly different.
And it is a good connection between African magic and our equipment, because we can find a very interesting point of to place with children and way how to work with them.
Yes, it certainly shows in the book and in the passion of the three of you. Now, before we talk more about the vestibular system and so on, I'd like to ask, for whom did you write the book?
Книгу писали для врачей, для неврологов. Они совершенно недостаточное представление вестибулярной системы для специалистов, для учителей, для психологов, для родителей, в конце концов, чтобы они понимали, почему дети плохо учатся, плохо читают, плохо развиваются. Даже во время родов вестибулярная система помогает ребенку родиться. Вот это тоже никто не знает.
Yes, I must say I don't have a medical background and I could understand your book.
Oh, very thorough.
Now, in the book, you show in a very clear and reader-friendly manner how gravity influences a child's development. And you talk about social development, emotional development, intellectual development, and physical development. Now, it's a very rich book. And in this conversation, we can only touch on a few points. So I want to ask a few specific questions. The first one is, since we're talking about gravity, what is the role of gravity at birth?
Вестибулярная система управляет движениями ребенка в утробе, в матке. И когда подходит время ребенку родиться, вестибулярная система разворачивает ребенка вниз головой, и ручки складываются, и ребенок рождается без травм. Хорошо рождается. Только женщина, когда она носит ребенка, беременная, pregnant женщина, она должна знать, что она тренирует вестибулярную систему ребенка своими движениями. А женщина должна двигаться, ходить, не лежать, не пассивно вести образ жизни, а активный образ жизни. Вестибулярная система начинает функционировать 4,5 месяца у плода. 4,5 месяца, дальше она работает.
May I add?
Please.
So the two parts to the vestibular system, two parts in the development. The first one is passive. That's when the baby is in utero and the baby is receiving vestibular movement through the mother's movement, as Victoria explained, but also the baby's movement in utero. There the baby starts learning how to move independently as well. But because the baby is an amniotic fluid, and as we know, if you're in a swimming pool, the effect of gravity, you feel lighter. You move easier in water than you do when you're outside of water. So that is preparing the vestibular system for birth. But the moment the baby has been born, that baby is outside of water. The baby now has to engage with gravity. It has to work against gravity. So gravity holds you. It's like your first mother. The three of us tend to talk about gravity as your first relationship and your first mother, because gravity holds you. And then once you're born, you start fighting gravity and moving away from gravity to reach milestones. So it's important to make it clear that there's a passive phase to the development of the vestibular system. And then once the baby has developed the vestibular system, the baby starts to actively engage in the development of the vestibular system.
I'd like to add that just imagine when child in utero in amniotic fluid, he or she feels lighter, 50 times lighter than outside. Yes. And how strong baby must be to resist this gravity, to answer to gravity, and to develop all muscles to resist gravity.
Да, ребенок в матке как космонавт, то есть ему легко, как в невесомости почти, 50 раз, да, разница. Поэтому он легко развивается, но когда он родился, ему становится трудно бороться с гравитацией.
Yes, I was really fascinated to read in the book that when astronauts or cosmonauts, as you call them in Russia, when they are in space, they do things like write in the form of the mirror image or write from right to left.
Yes.
Because of the role of gravity. Could you please elaborate on that a bit?
Victoria, can I quickly say something?
Yes.
Okay. Mariette, from a South African perspective, we don't do a lot of research into space travel that I'm aware of. It was fascinating to work with Russian scientists with such a rich culture in space travel. And it was from tremendous studies, and you'll see that in the book, of all the Russian scientists, not all, some of them, who did research in space travel, how much we've learned about gravity from them, because gravity is such a common thing. We never think about it. It's one of the things that we all take for granted. And the only way you can really study gravity is in the absence of gravity. And that is very difficult to study on Earth.
Да, это очень интересно, потому что многие люди не понимают, что гравитация важна и существует. Люди живут и думают, это такая вот, как обычно, они живут, и все так должно быть. На самом деле, когда гравитации нет, все сразу меняется. Наше чувство даже времени, оно основано на восприятии гравитации, пространства, ориентации вправо-лево ребенка. Когда ребенок пишет, строка у него гуляет. Когда он читает и пишет, строка, она теряет ребенок. Мы думаем, что ребенок ленится или он глупый, а он не видит строку.
Can I say something, Oleg? It is like the child, if the child has a problem with the vestibular system, it's like the child is an astronaut or a cosmonaut. They are experiencing something similar to a cosmonaut that is floating, free floating. So while you are floating, everything around you is floating as well, but so is the alphabet and numbers and symbols. So it's very difficult to organize them in a straight line, facing in the correct direction to enable a child to write or to read.
And I'd like to say, as a speech therapist, in Russia, we have a very deep tradition of study dyslexia. And there are a lot of different explanations why people have dyslexia. But nobody tell about vestibular system. And we have a huge number of children with dyslexia in our center. And when we make our diagnostic, we can see that these children have a strong problem, or sometimes it's all vestibular system. Sometimes it is a different parts of vestibular system, and very often it's asymmetric response of vestibular system. And it means that brain of these children has struggle about where is the right, where is the left, because brain needs to have similar information from both sides of the body and both sides of space.
Да. Вот эти изучения гравитации только начинаются. Вот мы, допустим, наша клиника очень интенсивно изучает, там во Франции изучают, в Соединенных Штатах отдельные маленькие клиники, да. Но это будущее, потому что гравитация влияет на все стороны нашей жизни. Это очень важное направление, и многие не понимают, недооценивают, но постепенно вот такие книги, как наша, они помогут людям продвигаться в понимании гравитации.
Yes, Melody, I think you could give us a specific example, because I read that often when a child struggles with reading or writing, the teachers or parents might think he just needs to practice more, get more exercise. But there are other ways of going about it. And I know that at the Mind Moves Institute, you have a specific way, something you do before a child reads or writes, to make him experience his body in a more effective way.
So, Marie, you said a very important word, and that was that children, if they battle with writing and reading, they need to practice more. But the moment we let them practice something more that they're not very good at the moment, it creates more anxiety. So now the child is battling with something he can't do, and he becomes more anxious. So there's something more that the child needs to practice is not writing and reading. We have found that movement is nature's way of stimulating the vestibular system and the rest of the brain and body to enable a child to read and write with greater ease. And that's why at the Mind Moves Institute, without knowing without knowing much about space research, because it's never been an interest of mine, but we've noticed that, and that was, I worked on instinct when I created a movement to trace the outline, to rub the child's ears, which activates the vestibular system, to trace the outline of the child's body, and then very importantly, to plant the child's feet firmly on the ground, and then to open the arms for the child to close the arms and the parent from behind to hug the child. It's the three most fundamental movements that we do at the Mind Moves Institute. And our research has indicated that with over 3,000 children, that 77% of those children who battle with learning actually had a problem to find themselves in space. And if I can make this simple, it's like, think of the vestibular system as a GPS. Because without current location, where am I? Where is my body and where are my body parts? How do you, if your GPS can't pick up where you are, it keeps on recalculating, and you can't execute, you can't do motor planning. So we do physical movements to enable the child to develop current location. And that planting of the feet on the earth is incredibly important, because research by one of the Russian scientists indicated, and Victoria and Oleg will give us the names, that there are gravitational receptors under the feet. And when we plant the child's feet instinctively on the ground, we're actually activating those gravitational receptors that give a child a sense of, where am I? It's a fixed point that enables them to navigate and motor plan and sequence their speech and sequence their writing.
Сейчас очень много интересных данных появляется, и мы тоже видим это, да, что у детей бывает, когда ребенок родился, тортиколис, кривошея, да? Или у детей бывают сколиозы, да? И раньше не знали, почему они появляются. Они появляются потому, что нарушается работа вестибулярной системы еще в утробе у матери, да? И даже какая рука ведущей бывает, это тоже какие-то есть работы. Ну, по крайней мере, вот тортиколис и сколиоз уже работы есть.
I found it astounding that we think of many problems that children have, from ADHD to dyslexia to speech problems. So many problems you can trace back to the vestibular system, and we'll get to the treatment a little later, which is not medicating the child, but involving them in movement. And in this way, I think this book is absolutely groundbreaking. It is a completely new way of looking at things. And I think it will help children so much also in terms of how they feel about themselves, and the poor parents who think they've done something wrong, or, they've missed something. Victoria, could you please tell us a little about the connection between the vestibular system and speech disorders?
I think the first person who started to think about connection between speech and vestibular system was Jean Iris. It is an occupational therapist from United States and author the theory of sensory integration. And she understood that if child has problem with post-rotatory nystagmus, this child have problem with speech. Nobody knows why. And now, too, nobody knows why, but we, using our equipment, can see that it is absolutely truth. And now we make our first steps to discover this connection between speech and language disorder and disorder of vestibular system.
Would you like to talk a little, one of you, about the body map, the concept of the body map, which is also related to gravity and the vestibular system?
So the brain doesn't know what the body looks like. The eyes can see the body, but the brain can't. So the brain constantly needs feedback from the body to know what have I got and where is what I've got in relationship to each other. So the brain needs feedback from the body, which is always some form of tactile information or proprioceptive information. So when something touches, when there's an itch, but something didn't bite you, and you touch and you start scratching, it's as though for a moment the brain has just forgotten about that body part. It can't pick it up. So it sends an itch. So you scratch or you rub, and that reminds the brain, but I still have that piece. So when the baby is in utero, the constricted space in utero and the mother's movement constantly activates the proprioceptors and the somatic sensors throughout the body that tells the brain, what have I got? And it's fascinating that one of the first drawing a child always makes, it doesn't matter where they are in the world, is in terms of a circle, because that's the natural shape of the baby in utero. And it's only once the baby has moved down the birth canal, or if the baby was born in a different way, when the mother massages the baby or handles the baby, it doesn't have to be a specific massage, but handles the baby's brain says, oh, I'm not a ball, I'm actually a long thing with other things, which is the limbs attached to that. So that creates a map of the brain in the body. And a child's drawing, very often, if a child was not taught how to draw, but the child draws spontaneously, they tend to draw their body map. And that's why we often find that a child that draws a very simple picture of themselves has a very simple map of the body. And that's why they battle to use their body effectively in learning, in getting dressed, in eating, in losing things.
I also read that the vestibular system influences what we see and how we see.
Вестибулярная система чрезвычайно важна для зрения, и поэтому эти исследования еще продолжаются, и мы сейчас сами очень много нового находим, и это будет материалы для следующих книг. Без вестибулярной системы зрение не будет работать правильно, потому что вот если оператор камеру несет на плече, то там будет вот так изображение скакать. А вестибулярная система, она, так сказать, фокусирует, правильно наводит и контролирует наше зрение так, чтобы оно расстояние, чтобы оно то есть модулирует наше зрение, регулирует. И без вестибулярной системы зрение бы не работало.
In the book, you mention the connection between the vestibular system and so many problems that children may have. But people will have to read the book to see it all, from ADHD to problems with sight, many learning problems. There are so many things that can be connected. But I think the surprise is that you talk about movement as medicine. Melody, could you talk about that after?
So if you look at the baby in utero, and if you look at the development of the human brain between conception and round about 2 years of age, it's phenomenal. It's at a tempo that is never, ever repeated. And if you look at what the baby naturally does, the baby moves. Yes, the baby eats, the baby sleeps a bit, but the baby moves a lot in lots of different ways. So nature uses physical movement to develop the different parts of the brain and the body. And so a baby needs to move a lot before a child is able to sit still and learn later. So when a baby is moving a lot, we sometimes think that baby is hyperactive. Yes, the baby needs to be hyperactive, because hyperactive means move a lot. You need to move a lot before you can stop moving a lot. You see, Mariette, and this is what's really important, is there are start and stop neurons in the brain. And you have to move before you can stop. And many, many children don't learn to stimulate the stop neurons, to enable them to stop, because you have to stop between stimulus and response. You need to stop before focus can go to the thinking part of the brain, so you can really learn with ease. Now, this is really, really important, because when a baby starts reaching milestones, lifting their head, rolling over, sitting, each of those milestones are showing you how the brain is maturing. But what is even more fascinating is that traditional games like Ring a Rosie, like Blind Man's Buff, there are so many traditional children's games are incredibly effective at mimicking the movements of a baby to continue to stimulate the different parts of the brain to populate for nerve growth, for oxygen to circulate that enables nerve growth. So movement can be used as medicine, not to the exclusion of anything else. There's no one answer, but movement is completely and utterly, we believe, underrated in its importance to address children with challenges. Or what happens very often, because the child's behavior presents as attention deficit or dyslexia, we have found in our research collaboration that very often what presents as a problem is actually a fault in the system of the child. It's not a label and a permanent problem. It is a faulty system that can be addressed using movement. If I can add to that, Mariette, because there's a difference between exercise and movement.
Yes.
Exercise is what often happens in an adult gym. It's Movement is something completely different. The whole facial expression is different. It's natural. There's energy flowing and there's innate joy, where with exercise, there's more force. So our approach and what Oleg and Victoria does in their different clinics is create opportunities for different movement experiences, what the children love so much. In Africa, we've got a lot of space. So we just send the children to go and play outside because there's space where they can run and climb trees and, do those things, which is natural to children.
Мы вот когда работаем с родителями, они говорят, почему сейчас столько в Москве, в Петербурге столько детей, которые не говорят, у которых аутизм, которые поздно начали ходить, там, двигаться. То есть идет очень большое опоздание развития детей, то есть катастрофическое отставание. Да? И родители говорят, может быть, это виновата генетика, может быть, виновата экология. Но экология сейчас стала лучше, меньше стало заводов работать, экономические там вот какие-то кризисы, да. Стало меньше движений, люди стали возить детей на машинах, сами перестали ходить. И это, конечно, катастрофа для развития мозга ребенка.
If I can just add to that, in terms of the current pandemic, worldwide pandemic, what we are talking now, we are also finding with adults, because adults are moving less at the moment. There seems to be a disconnect between body and cognition, and people tend to feel more disoriented. People tend to feel emotionally more insecure, overwhelmed, and it's one of the research pieces that Oleg and Victoria introduced me to, where one of the in their research centers, the space research centers, when the cosmonauts are in the air, they now wear boots with stimulators in the boots to create that sensation of walking. So during the pandemic, when we are sitting so much, walking less, our everyday movement is restricted. Can you imagine what it does to a child's developing brain? But the same applies to adults, because it feels like the wires are pulling apart in terms of the connection between your thoughts, your emotions, and your actions.
I think what we have talked about today is very well illustrated by your book cover, which is, it's a scientifically based book, but it doesn't have a cover that says science. It has a cover with happy children playing all around the earth. So I think that says it all. Where can this book be found?
The book can be found at Prognosis Institute Clinic in St. Petersburg, at the Mindhus Institute in Johannesburg, and on Amazon.
And then my last question to each of you is, what are your hopes for this book?
Эта книга даст толчок для развития развития понимания вестибулярной системы не только в России, в Африке, в Южной Африке, но и во всем мире, если она будет проходить, потому что таких книг очень мало, и еще люди очень мало этого понимают, эту проблему. Я надеюсь, что это будет очень такой хороший шаг вперед. Такой книги мы не видели ни в Америке, ни в Европе. Это первая книга такая, которая полно освещает представление о влиянии вестибулярной системы на все стороны жизни ребенка, вообще человека.
Victoria, your hope for the book?
My hope that parents start to understand that children need to move a lot instead of sitting in the home with first in the school and after school with extra teachers and then made homework. It is important, but moving is much important than sitting near the TV or with laptop, even with books.
And for myself, two things. I hope our book sparks international collaboration because, as Oleg has indicated, it's only the start. So we would love to collaborate with other scientists. So that's the research part. But more than that, I hope it sparks some understanding of the beautiful innate nature of children and respect for that. Because children instinctively want to move. Children instinctively want to learn through movement. And I hope our book sparks in some way in teachers, in governments, we spark something to restore the innocence and the nature and respect for the nature of children and their natural need to move to learn.
Thank you very much, Melody and Victoria and Alec, for your passion and for gifting the world with your book, Gravity, A Missing Link in Child Development. And may your ideals for this book come true. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.